Ms. Posey, right, is it okay to kind of raise the question to the table?
Absolutely.
Okay, so right, there's one thing I'm wondering about. And right, in the first article, it says that anti-smoking movements are not necessarily fascist. But right, on the other hand, the second article says that the Nazi campaign against tobacco was as fascist as the Yellowsters in the gas camps. So right, do you think anti-tobacco campaign was fascist? And right, if so, to what extent did it contribute to German fascism? That's a good question.
Okay. In my opinion, I believe that the intentions behind this campaign were fascist, as they used the racial ideology and the idea of racial purity and creating this superior Aryan race. That's what the reasoning behind the campaign, because though it kept the citizens healthy, it was for the idea that Germans had to be a healthy Aryan race ready to conquer all these nations. And this could be seen like not only through policies with like for health, but also they did race and eugenics, natural selection and elimination to create this superior race, and that's why it's as fascist as the Yellow Stars and death camps, because the intention behind it was for like racial purity and health.
Yeah, to add to what Francis said, in the third article, I believe, it talks about racial hygiene, and it's not only just regarding tobacco, but it's like the Nazi, like people who are part of Nazi and following them, mainly talked about like free of illness and purity, and that also included tobacco, so I feel like that was their main idea.
Adding to Francis and Mickey's point, I also see the campaign as a very fascist way of like spreading propaganda, because their incentives were to purify their race, right? And also, in addition to that, I think it's because the tobacco industries were economically striving. The Nazis were afraid that the tobacco companies could possibly overtake the government. So I think that's why they also try to suppress the use of tobacco, so the Nazi could be in full control of the economy and the government in general.
Something I found interesting was that the tobacco industry was very powerful, and it was increasing in size. What I found interesting was that it says in I think two of the articles that the German economy relied 1/12 of the German economy relied on the tobacco industry.
Government's income,
yeah.
1941.
Yeah, so what I just found interesting was that even though there was this big campaign against tobacco, it was never outright banned. Obviously there were restrictions, but there was no full ban on it.
And the laws that were implemented never fully got implemented, because tobacco had such a big role in Germany's economy, so they could never really ban it forever or fully ban it all around.
In that sense, do you guys think that the German Nazi Party actually created a tobacco those propaganda because they cared about those chosen folks, or do you think it's partly to do with more to do with sharing their Nazi ideologies and brainwashing them through this platform?
I think they did create the campaigns against tobacco because it was believed that this was quoting one of the many influence that could weaken that monster race, and by ridding themselves of tobacco would free them of illness and impurity. So yes, I do think it was created to reach that like kind of thing.
There were also like studies from like scientists, like they did put time into studying to find out what are the bad effects of tobacco. Like Franz Muller in 1939 found out he had the first study linking tobacco use with cancer. So I think they actually did care about the health.
Adding on to Caitlin and Wing's point, I do think they genuinely cared about their people's health, but I think that was kind of a way to like advertise the Nazi propaganda, like the Nazi regime, to show that like, oh, they actually cared for the people, but actually it was like in a subtle way implementing their ideology, and also I think it was like a way to glorify Hitler, that he's actually pure and he cares about his people a lot.
But I also think that although it was used as propaganda, it did have its benefits, because without this like intense research into like the causes of lung cancer and how it's connected to smoking, we might have not, this like science might have been set back by a lot of decades. So in the sense, there are some advantages to this, even though it's
Okay, to build off of your point, if you look at the final, it's not an article, but it's a research paper. If you look at the conclusion, it says that policies on tobacco in Nazi Germany are much more complex than it is often represented by those who invoke them to condemn those seeking to reduce the burden of disease caused by smoking. And if you look at like the dates of all of the articles, it's between like 1990 and the 2010s, which is like around a time where a lot of anti-tobacco campaigns were starting to emerge in other countries. So I think it's important to consider that some, like, associating the anti-tobacco campaign with fascist and Nazi ideals might be also like partially to make it seem like control on tobacco might be bad. So there might be another agenda to it as well.
Yeah, I think like kind of like adding on to that, like the rest of the world after World War II kind of like disregarded all these studies as like Nazi propaganda. It's like in the, I think it's the second article, in like page 3 out of 5, the last like small paragraph. It says how like these studies were made in like the 1920s and 30s, and like it took like the first studies linking cigarettes and cancer in like America and like the rest of the world like started to appear in like the 60s and 50s.
1971.
Yeah, I think onto that point, do you guys think it was right for sort of like, because like the studies made by like German scientists during the 1930s into links between like lung cancer and smoking were like legitimate. There was like, they were even confirmed in 1943 as said in the second article. I mean, this article called "The Nazis Forgotten Anti-Smoking Campaign." It said that these studies were confirmed in 1943 by scientists at the university in Germany. Do you think like it was right for the West to just dismiss this, like these studies as Nazi propaganda after they found out about them? Do you think they should have like gone more in depth into like actually like trying to see if they're legitimate or not? Because like if they did, it might have it might have brought like the anti-smoking movement that we like know today to the world earlier, and it might have saved a lot of lives.
Yeah, I think with that, though, a lot of the economy depended on cigarettes and smoking. A lot of the black market was, after the war, cigarettes were really expensive and used for the economy. But I have another like ethical question, I guess, but should, in the article, the anti-tobacco campaign of the Nazis, little known aspects, on the last page, it says that scientific memories are often clouded by the celebrations of victors, and the political history of science is occasionally less unpleasant than we could wish. But should the political history of science dictate whether it should be used? Because there was the Nazi medical experiments also in Nazi Germany, and lots of the people involved with the experiment, with the campaign and the science behind the campaign committed suicide and were tried for crimes against humanity. So would their research be ethical to use or ethical to implement?
I think how ethical it is different from whether we should use that. I mean, although their methods were inhumane, I feel like it really developed Germany's medicine, and they have really good medicine in comparison to other countries. So I feel like you can't disregard it, and I feel like although it was wrong, I don't want to sound bad, but if it happened, like, you might want to take advantage of it rather than just let it go to waste, you know.
But
Also
at what
then,
cost?
like-
Because so many
Yeah.
lives were lost to this
Yeah.
experimentation. You have to weigh
yeah.
the benefits and because you don't know, because so many people's lives were lost at the cost of this experimentation to find out these medical innovations, but it could be done another way. It's just they didn't find another way. If they had found another way to figure out these medical advancements, it would have been all right. But since they used human lives, and especially lives that they deem lesser than them, it kind of creates an ethical dilemma, and it's hard to distinguish whether it's okay to use.
Well, smoking wasn't the only medical advancements that were found by Nazi Germany. They also found a lot of the human anatomy during Jewish war with war camps and stuff like that. And so while I see your point, is also that that data was used almost immediately by all other countries because it was found factual. So what makes this data different from the other
Well, I think this
Because they
regarding
use
like,
human.
oh, sorry.
Go ahead.
Okay, disregarding the ethical conditions, I think one of the main reasons why it wasn't implemented worldwide was because, in a way, the anti-smoking campaign was also a political smear campaign against the Allied leaders, because Hitler constantly used the fact that he didn't smoke as a superiority point against fellow Allied leaders like Churchill, Stalin, and Roosevelt. So perhaps one of the reasons why that the West or Allied countries or other countries do not acknowledge Germany's anti-smoking campaign was because it brought a political smear on their image, in a sense, and that would prevent their image. So perhaps disregarding the ethical conditions, it was also a fact of the political agenda that they held against the Germans.
Also, though, I think, like, more than the political agenda, I think what, like, sort of stopped the rest of the world from using these studies are, like, the big tobacco and, like, cigarettes companies are, like, making, like, loads of money in the 1950s and 60s. And they don't want their, like, market ruined, so they kind of, like, using this, like, sort of, like, saying that, oh yeah, this is just a Nazi campaign, and using, like, the political part of the studies, they kind of, like, disregarded all the studies. So I think, sort of, because of those, like, cigarette companies studies.
And even the people in Germany, they didn't really like care that much about anti-campaign, because like the number of cigarettes, it did rose like dramatically in those years, even though there were like there was like strong anti-tobacco campaign, and they were like they used the facts from the experiments, but like the numbers still rose from like 550 to 900 cigarettes per year, like per person. So even the people in the country.
Don't you think that might have to do, like, was that after the war, or was it just during when this campaign was?
During, yeah, for 6 years.
Yeah, so, but like, I feel like that kind of has to do with the fact that they were at, like, war then, and a lot of people were sent as soldiers, and people were, like, pressured, like, economically and, like, socially, they weren't really at a happy place. So I feel like that's why, but I feel like after a while, after 6 years, it worked pretty well.
But also, some people that opposed the Nazi regime, they used smoking cigarettes as a way of opposing. I think it was in one of the articles they said that this was one of the more passive ways of resistance by smoking and kind of disregarding the law against it.
I think perhaps one of the reasons why this campaign was not as successful as it could be is because I think Caitlin said earlier, the German economy relied so much on the development and also the growth of the tobacco industry, because it's important to remember that after the defeat in World War I, Germany's economy was absolutely crippled. It was a country still recovering from its economic debts, and the risk of again losing another war would really bring another wage of large debt on them. So it was important that the tobacco industry was supplying, as Caitlin said, like 1/12 of the total income for the government. So probably Germany could not go all out on their banning, and that's probably perhaps why tobacco was never outright banned, because it was such a crucial part of the economy.
Yeah, adding on to that, in the first article, the anti-tobacco campaign of the Nazis, it says here that in 1937 to 38, the German national income from tobacco taxes and tariffs exceeded 1 billion Reichsmarks, and then by 1941, as a result of the new taxes. Basically, yeah, according to Germany's National Accounting Office, by 1941, tobacco taxes constituted about 1/12 of the government's entire income. And at the time, 1 billion Reichsmarks was a lot of money. And yeah, I agree with Kui in saying that it wasn't as successful because the economy relied so much on this industry.
Building off that, I'm questioning how much does ideology matter when it comes to the economy, because in the last article, Tobacco Policies in Nazi Germany, not as simple as it seems, it talks about how there was no consistent Nazi policy to combat smoking, and also there was ambivalence to tobacco control at the highest levels. So compared to their ideology, their like racial purity and stuff, and the economy, how do you think they weigh them? To what extent does ideology matter when it's up against the economy, especially during war?
I feel like that relates to what we mentioned a couple minutes ago, like the fact that they didn't want to lose another war. Like I feel like that really pushed the fact that because tobacco was such an important aspect of their government income, they really could not let it go. But I feel like to many extent, in many ways, they passed laws that restricted women and children at different ages. So I feel like they were trying to create that kind of environment where these rules were enforced. But yeah.
Adding on to what you said, you talked about like women. So I think that was one of the most important parts of this campaign, because in the book, in the textbook, in the chapter, it was talking about how women were one of the most important parts of the Nazi regime, because they were the childbearers. They provided the kids, the children of Aryan race. So by banning cigarettes, it was also a way for the women to stay healthy while they were pregnant, because their only job in society during this time was childbearing. And Hitler made sure that they could have, carry a baby to term in a healthy way after all these studies about cancer with
I don't know if this is going on the sidetrack, but in the first article, the anti-tobacco campaign of the Nazis, on the third page, if you look at the first paragraph, it says by the 3rd of November in 1941, the German government raised tobacco taxes to a higher level they had ever been, 80 to 95% of the retail price. But I think in a way the Nazi government was actually really smart to raise the taxes, because tobacco is addictive and it's hard to quit. But through raising the taxes, they could support the economy, and then that would allow the government to flourish. So I think it was a really tactical way for the Nazi government to actually imply this.
I just have a quick question. When the taxes rise this much, people usually go to the black market to get them, but considering how much revenue the government made from these taxes, do you think that was, and I'm not informed of this, but do you think that was not as if the black market wasn't as effective, or people didn't go to it as much, or why do you think the government made so much money despite having raised the tax by so much?
Well, because of the wartime economy, the economy was back on track. Before Hitler, there was the Great Depression. Yeah. But I think as the economy went back on track, there's still that consumerist culture, and more there is. But your point before was that they needed the economy for the wartime. But here it says that the Führer even suggested that Nazism might never have triumphed in Germany had he not given up smoking. And there was another one where
Where
they
is
said,
The first page of the
and I think they said that, I'm not sure where, but they said that maybe smoking was one of the reasons why they lost the war. And
Yeah.
yeah, I don't know where. So then, how did their ideology hold up, even if they say that they credited smoking as one of the reasons why they lost the war?
Could you like?
Wait, Francis, can you give me where you found that extract?
I'm trying to, but so far there's the one on the first page of the anti-tobacco campaign of the Nazis, where it says, Nazi might not have triumphed in Germany had he not given up smoking. And then I'll try to find the...
Well, also, I feel like along with this campaign being a way to kind of create that pure Aryan race that the Nazi Party believed in, I feel like this was also created obviously for like propaganda and to glorify Hitler, because it says here on the second page of the first article, underneath the picture of Hitler, it says that our Fuhrer Adolf Hitler drinks no alcohol and does not smoke. His performance at work is incredible. And then also someone mentioned that he was compared to Churchill, Stalin, and Roosevelt, who were all fond of tobacco. And so it kind of seems like it was another way of glorifying like Hitler and the party, to create a healthier society.
Well, the propaganda methods also, like, they were more effective because of that. Probably the glorifying the leader, they were more effective with soldiers, because soldiers they smoked a quarter less tobacco than before the immediate period, and that glorifying propaganda that was proven to work within Germany helped decrease most numbers of heavy smokers as well.
Yeah, adding on to what Mitch said, I can't exactly remember which article it was, but I think they talked about they gave incentive for soldiers to stop smoking by like if they don't like for a cigarette they can get more food or like an alternative.
It's almost as though that like for not smoking you get like a prize, because obviously in war times extra chocolate and food is like a really big deal with rations, and so yeah, I think
And to provide more evidence for that, on the third page of the anti-tobacco campaign of the Nazis, it says that extra cigarettes were sometimes available for purchase, but these were generally limited to 50 per man per month, and were often unavailable. And like, the article says that all of these methods worked because in the key messages it says that per capita cigarette consumption increased during the first 6 years of Nazi rule, but declined during the war and the post-war period.
But in the first part of that same paragraph, the same article, it says that the proportion of soldiers smoking had increased, but the common people, the non-military, decreased by just over 14%, but actually in the military it increased. Is that
Where does it say that?
After the war.
a 1944 survey of 1,000 servicemen found that the proportion of soldier smoking had increased. Only 12% non-smokers. The total consumption of tobacco had decreased.
But the average soldier was smoking about a quarter less tobacco
Yeah, so
than in the immediate pre-war period.
more than smoke, but in less amounts.
So then, wouldn't that reflect that it was ineffective and the only reason that they didn't smoke was not because they were
It was effective because of the
dissuaded,
rationing.
but because
And
of
the
they
persuasion.
physically couldn't obtain cigarettes? Then would that, so, that,
I think
I feel like that could
for the
be
large
something.
part of this discussion, we've been talking about the Nazi government's policy against it, but I think we tend to forget that the tobacco industry themselves were also very powerful. Like, they were able to launch some of their own journals to combat the anti-tobacco campaign by the Nazi government. So in a sense, I think I want to ask that where does the balance lie between the establishment of the tobacco industry and their fight against the Nazis' policies against reducing the amount of tobacco smoke in Germany?
I don't have the answer to Chris' question, but I have a question regarding what we just asked. Like Germany did invest a lot and end up like create a campaign surrounding like real facts that like smoking causes cancer. But do you think people would have believed it to an extent even if that was not true? Like if there was no science backing it up, like do you think the consequences would have been the same if they had created these propaganda and this campaign? Like,
I mean, probably. I don't
Okay.
think
It's
Well,
from
yeah.
the
when you
government.
read when you read like propaganda posters, well, the average person never goes back to like bibliography and like fact checks and like critically think about those things, especially in like periods of like crisis during the war, when like there's such like an intensive campaign to like tell people things. Most people just kind of like accept it as true without.
Well, also if you look at the extent of Nazi propaganda campaigns at the time that they were in power, like those had a big effect on people, and it was like they were able to inflict their ideologies onto German society. So I think if you look at it that way, then probably.
Yeah, and
Also another thing is that like most of Germans actually supported like the Nazi party. So like if someone who I believe in tells me something, I will believe in that without like controlling that.
and
Yeah,
to
adding on to Dario's
provide
point,
evi-
like sorry, do you wanna?
No, it's
Okay.
fine.
So the tobacco, I think someone mentioned before, was used as a way to boost Hitler's image among the people, and the fact that he didn't smoke, and claimed that it was one of the main reasons, like without him, Nazi Germany would not have developed. So in a sense, as Dario said, the establishment of Hitler as like a superior image to the people, and the fact that he did not smoke, perhaps contributed to his public image to the people.
And they also like classified tobacco as like racial poisons, and I feel like it connects with like what Francis said about how one of the reasons why they lost the war was because of tobacco, and it's kind of like
Sure, that's right. I think I misread.
yeah, but
Yeah,
it's fine.
no,
But
there
then
was-
like it kind of connects like to how the Nazis are like they're blaming the other countries for the loss, like because if you get what I just said, like how you lost because of tobacco, and now they're calling tobacco like racial poison.
Well, also adding on to that, it's the second article, page 205, says that the Nazi ideological focus on tobacco as a corrupting force, whose elimination would serve as a cause of racial hygiene, and it also, by reading the sales of tobacco, establish and maintain the German Aryan master race that was free of illness and impurity. I think if you told people that, if they stop smoking, like they're gonna be kind of this pure, it'll help them to the road to like a pure race and stuff like. Yeah, I don't know. I think that's kind of effective.
To add on to that and to answer like the original question about whether the propaganda would still work if there was no science backing it. If you look at the examples of propaganda from the first article, you can see that it's like there's a mix of both unscientific and scientifically based propaganda. Like the last one, it says, "Is it really just by chance that men are so much more likely than women to suffer from lung diseases?" So, and also that the article says that the German tobacco industry tried to diffuse the anti-tobacco movement by characterizing it as unscientific. So since there were so many different types of propaganda, I think that even if the science wasn't there to back it up, it would have still had the same effect.
And they used a lot of fear in their propaganda to make people think that, well, to show that if they keep on smoking, they're going to die. And it can be seen like through the amount of cigarettes they smoke, like what it equates to, and then smoking, like the devil, connecting it to the devil, which is quite symbolic because during that time religion is an important part of society, and if you connect smoking to the devil, people are more likely to stop. So it shows that religion is also a factor in this.
Going back to the ideology of the whole campaign, I was wondering, for women, was it not only a way to ensure that they were healthy enough to childbear, but a way to enforce the ideals? Because there were the Weimar evils, there was the new woman who smoked, who went out and got a job. But in this, in the Nazi regime, it was more housework, kitchen, children,
Church.
yeah. So would the smoking campaign be a way to ensure that these women followed the more traditional paths and were less
To follow the social expectations and
Yeah.
norms of women, so that they appeared to be more feminine and separated from the men. So
Yeah.
they don't work, they don't smoke, they don't do things that are typically more masculine.
Yeah, but also so that they were healthy enough to
Yeah,
to bear
because that
like,
was
a
the
pure
most
child.
important.
Yeah. So yeah, I think both.
Yeah, I agree that the campaign was targeted at women, but what kind of confused me is if you look at the infographic, not the propaganda poster, I guess, in the first article on the this one, I don't know what page that's this one here.
Yeah.
You can see that this is clearly targeted at men, because it's look at the numbers of men that smoke compared to the number of women. It's is this a coincidence? So it's sort of encouraging men to stop smoking, which I feel is interesting since we established that the campaign was largely directed at women.
I feel like that kind of comes from the fact that they wanted to protect their soldiers from smoking, because some of those soldiers start dying because of smoking and their lungs had issues. So I feel like from that that's where it's rooted, and they just want to target the general male population along with the female for the purpose of purity.
And I also wonder, because there's also a lot of racial profiling and racial hygiene, I wonder if those groups such as Jews, homosexuals, all those, was the rule of the ban against smoking applied to them, or did the regime not care about their well-being?
I think in response to one of Francis's points earlier on the security of the social image of women, I think in a sense it's also important to acknowledge that the campaign did do a lot of good for women, German women as well, because it prevented 20,000 German women from dying of lung cancer. So that in itself is a good thing for German health. So perhaps maybe, would you guys say that the campaign did more for the social freedom of women, in a sense that although it restricted their new freedom movement, it also helped promote their health, in a sense that it reduced the number of deaths by lung cancer?
But with that,
I'm gonna stop you there. Because
I was so ready for that one. Okay, I'll just continue. With that, though, they could have implemented it